The morning sun cast long shadows across the campsite as Kyle Simmons stepped out of his RV, stretching his arms wide to greet the day. At 50 years old, Kyle had the weathered look of a man who spent more time outdoors than in his salt and pepper, hair tousled from sleep and his blue eyes still heavy with the remnants of dreams. 3 days into his week-long stay at Moraine Park Campground in Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park, Kyle had settled into a comfortable routine: coffee at sunrise, hiking until his knees complained, and dinner under the stars while planning the next day's adventure. Another perfect day, he murmured to himself, inhaling the crisp mountain air that carried the scent of pine and last night's campfires. The campground was beginning to stir around him, fellow campers emerging from tents and recreational vehicles to start their morning rituals. Kyle nodded politely to a young couple at the neighboring site before turning his attention to breakfast. His RV, a 26-foot Winnebago Aspect he'd purchased 5 years ago after his divorce, had been his faithful companion on countless journeys across the American landscape. Kyle had named her Roxanne, partly because she was painted a deep burgundy color that reminded him of the Police song, and partly because naming inanimate objects had become something of a habit for him in his solitary travels. The interior was meticulously organized, a place for everything and everything in its place, the result of years of trial and error in mobile living. Kyle retrieved his portable propane grill from the storage compartment beneath the RV and set it up on the picnic table. He preferred cooking outdoors whenever weather permitted, finding that food somehow tasted better in the open air. From the mini-fridge inside, he collected his breakfast ingredients: eggs, bacon, sliced bell peppers, and a small block of sharp cheddar cheese. His cast-iron frying pan, a 12-inch lodge that had been seasoned by hundreds of meals, hung from a hook near the stove, and Kyle grabbed it automatically, his morning routine so ingrained that he barely needed to think about each step. As he laid strips of bacon in the pan, Kyle glanced at his surroundings, taking in the majestic view. Moraine Park Campground sat in a wide valley, surrounded by towering peaks that caught the morning light. Elk often grazed in the meadows nearby, and Kyle had spent the previous evening watching a small herd from his folding camp chair, a glass of whiskey in hand and his camera resting on his knees. The photographs he'd captured would join thousands of others stored on his laptop, a digital record of his journey to visit every national park in the United States. The bacon began to sizzle, filling the air with a mouth-watering aroma. Kyle breathed it in appreciatively, then reached for his phone to check the weather forecast for the day. He'd planned a hike to Emerald Lake, a moderate trail that would take him past 3 alpine lakes nestled among the mountains. The forecast promised clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect hiking conditions. "Morning, neighbor," called a voice, interrupting Kyle's thoughts. He looked up to see Mike Tanner, a retired schoolteacher from Nebraska who was camping 2 sites down. Mike and his wife Barbara had arrived the same day as Kyle, and they'd fallen into the easy camaraderie that often developed between solo travelers and couples on the road. "Morning, Mike," Kyle replied with a smile. "Sleep well?" "Like a log," Mike said, approaching with a steaming mug of coffee in hand. "Barbara's still out cold. We did that Alberta Falls trail yesterday and she's feeling it this morning. What's on your agenda today?" Kyle flipped the bacon with a plastic spatula, careful not to scratch his beloved pan. "Thinking of heading up to Emerald Lake. Should be a good one. Not too strenuous. Lots of scenery." Mike nodded appreciatively. "We did that one last year, worth every step. Watch out for the afternoon thunderstorms, though. They can roll in fast up at that elevation." "Always do," Kyle assured him, tapping his weatherproof jacket hanging nearby. "Been caught in enough mountain storms to know better than to go unprepared." They chatted for a few more minutes about trails and weather patterns before Mike excused himself to start his own breakfast preparations. Kyle continued cooking, cracking eggs into the pan alongside the nearly done bacon and adding diced peppers to the mix. He was just about to sprinkle cheese over the top when a movement at the edge of the campsite caught his eye. At first, Kyle thought it might be another camper cutting through to reach the restrooms, but the shape that emerged from between 2 lodgepole pines was distinctly non-human. A black bear, its fur glossy in the morning sunlight, ambled into view with the unhurried confidence of a creature at the top of the food chain. Kyle froze, spatula suspended in mid-air. The bear was of medium size, probably a young adult, its weight somewhere around 200 pounds. Not massive as bears went, but more than large enough to pose a serious threat. It snuffled the air, clearly drawn by the scent of cooking bacon, and turned, its head directly toward Kyle's campsite. Years of wilderness experience kicked in, and Kyle's mind raced through the bear safety protocols he knew by heart. Make yourself look bigger. Don't run. Back away slowly. Make noise. But with the bear standing between him and the safety of his RV, Kyle's options were limited. The picnic table with his breakfast preparations stood as a meager barrier between them. "Hey, bear," Kyle called firmly, trying to strike a balance between assertiveness and aggression. He slowly raised his arms to appear larger. "Move along." Now, the bear paused, seemingly assessing this strange creature that made loud noises and grew suddenly bigger. For a moment, Kyle thought the animal might turn and retreat, recognizing that the potential meal wasn't worth the confrontation. But then the breeze shifted slightly, carrying a fresh wave of bacon aroma directly to the bear, and its interest visibly intensified. With a deliberate motion, the bear moved closer, its nose working overtime to process the tantalizing smells. It was now barely 15 feet away, close enough for Kyle to see the amber highlights in its brown eyes and the wet gleam of its nose. There was something almost comical about its expression, a look of single-minded food focus that would have been endearing in any context other than a potentially dangerous wildlife encounter. "Mike," Kyle called, keeping his eyes fixed on the bear while trying to alert his neighbor without startling the animal. "Bear in camp." From 2 sites over, he heard Mike's startled exclamation, followed by the sound of a car door slamming as the retired teacher likely took shelter. Out of the corner of his eye, Kyle could see movement at other nearby campsites as people became aware of the situation and retreated to safety. The bear, seemingly undeterred by the increasing human activity, took another step forward. It was now close enough that Kyle could smell its wild, musky odor, mixing with the scent of his breakfast. Kyle knew that black bears weren't typically aggressive toward humans unless they felt threatened or were protecting cubs, but a food-conditioned bear in a campground was unpredictable. This one showed no fear, which was concerning. Looking around for anything that might help, Kyle realized he was still holding the frying pan, warm with the heat of his partially cooked breakfast. The cast-iron skillet was heavy and solid, a sign of a potential deterrent if the situation escalated. He gripped its handle more firmly. "Back off," Kyle commanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. He took a small step to the side, trying to position himself where he might have a clear path to the RV if needed. The bear dropped to all fours and moved forward again, clearly fixated on the food rather than the human holding it. Kyle backed, up a step, maintaining the distance but felt the edge of the picnic table against the back of his legs. He was running out of room to retreat. In that moment, Kyle made a split-second decision. Rather than abandoning his breakfast and backing, a way which might teach the bear that intimidating humans led to food rewards, he decided to stand his ground. If this bear learned that threatening people resulted in meals, it would create problems for other campers and ultimately lead to the animal being euthanized. Kyle had seen it happen before. Bears that became too comfortable around humans rarely met good ends. "Hey!" Kyle shouted, banging the spatula against the side of the frying pan to create a loud, jarring noise. "Get out of here!" The sudden clamor startled the bear, causing it to rear up on its hind legs again. Standing upright, it was significantly taller than Kyle's 6-foot frame, a reminder of just how powerful these woodland creatures could be. For several tense seconds, they stared at each other, human and bear locked in a silent confrontation beneath the Colorado sky. Then, with a surprising burst of speed, the bear dropped back to all fours and charged. Kyle had only an instant to react. As the bear closed the distance, he instinctively swung the frying pan in a wide arc, sending partially cooked eggs and bacon flying in all directions. The heavy cast iron connected with the bear's shoulder. Not a direct hit, but enough to surprise the animal and momentarily throw it off balance. The impact sent a jarring shock up Kyle's arm, and he felt something in his wrist give way with a sharp twinge of pain. The pan almost slipped from his grasp, but he managed to maintain his hold, ready for a second swing if necessary. The bear, startled by the blow and the shower of hot food, veered to the side with a confused huff. It shook, its head vigorously, as if trying to make sense of this unexpected development, before turning its attention to the scattered breakfast now littering the ground. Kyle seized the moment to back away, clutching his throbbing wrist to his chest while keeping the frying pan raised in his other hand. The pain was intense, radiating from his wrist up his forearm, but the immediate danger overrode any consideration of injury. "Kyle," called a voice from nearby. "Over here, quick." It was Barbara Tanner, Mike's wife, standing in the doorway of their small Class B RV and urgently waving him over. Kyle didn't hesitate, backing slowly toward their campsite while keeping his eyes on the bear, which was now hungrily devouring the eggs and bacon from the ground. Once he was a safe distance away, Kyle turned and quickly covered the remaining ground to the Tanner's RV, clutching his injured wrist. Barbara pulled him inside and quickly shut the door behind him. "Mike's called the park rangers," she said, her voice steady despite the evident concern in her eyes. "They should be here soon. Are you hurt?" Kyle nodded grimly, finally allowing himself to focus on the pain radiating from his wrist. "Think I sprained it pretty bad when I hit the bear. Might be broken." He carefully set the frying pan down on their counter, noticing for the first time that the handle was slightly bent from the force of the impact. "Let me see," Barbara said, gently examining his wrist with the practiced hands of someone used to dealing with injuries. As a former school nurse, she had treated countless sprains and breaks during her career. "It's swelling already, but I don't think it's broken. Probably a sprain, like you said. We should get some ice on it right away." Mike appeared from the bedroom area of their RV, smartphone in hand. "Rangers are on their way," he reported, then noticed Kyle's injury. "Damn, that looks painful. What happened out there?" As Barbara retrieved an ice pack from their small freezer, Kyle recounted the encounter, describing how the bear had charged and how he'd instinctively defended himself with the frying pan. "Got it all on video, by the way," Mike added, holding up his phone with a slightly sheepish expression. "Started recording as soon as I spotted the bear heading toward your campsite. Hope you don't mind, but it was pretty impressive how you stood your ground." "You filmed it?" Kyle asked, surprised. "Instead of, I don't know, making noise to scare the bear away." Mike had the good grace to look embarrassed. "I called to you, but you seemed to have it under control. And I did call the rangers right after. Besides, everyone knows you're supposed to stay in your vehicle if there's a bear in camp." Kyle couldn't argue with the last point, though he wished someone had been making additional noise to help deter the bear. Still, he was curious about the footage. "Can I see?" Mike nodded and tapped his phone screen, turning it so Kyle could view the video. The footage was remarkably clear, capturing the entire encounter from the moment the bear approached to the dramatic swing of the frying pan and Kyle's retreat to the Tanner's RV. The whole incident had lasted less than 2 minutes, sure though it had felt much longer to Kyle in the moment. "This is going to get a lot of views," Mike said, already tapping on his phone again. "Mind if I post it? People should see what to do and what not to do when a bear comes into camp." Kyle started to object, not particularly keen on becoming a social media sensation, but was interrupted by the arrival of 2 park rangers in a green and white SUV, lights flashing. Barbara applied the ice pack to Kyle's wrist and secured it with an elastic bandage from their first aid kit before they all stepped outside to meet the rangers. The bear was still in Kyle's campsite, having moved on from the scattered breakfast to investigating the picnic table and grill. It showed no sign of fear as the rangers approached, another concerning indication that this particular animal had become habituated to human presence and associated people with food. "Everyone stay back," instructed the female ranger, introducing herself as Ranger Martinez. Her partner, a younger man named Ranger Thompson, readied what looked like a beanbag shotgun, a non-lethal deterrent used to frighten aggressive wildlife. "That bear's been trouble all season," Ranger Martinez explained, as they observed from a safe distance. "We've had multiple reports of it approaching campsites in this area. Unfortunately, once they lose their natural fear of humans, it's very difficult to reverse." "What will happen to it?" Kyle asked, already suspecting the answer. Ranger Martinez's expression was grim. "We'll try aversive conditioning first. Loud noises, beanbag rounds, the works. If that doesn't work and it continues to show food-seeking behavior around humans, we may have no choice but to euthanize it. That's why the A-fed bear is a dead bear saying exists. Once they associate humans with food, it's usually just a matter of time." Kyle felt a pang of sadness, despite his recent close call. The bear was just following its instincts, seeking the most efficient food source available. It wasn't the animal's fault that human carelessness had taught it that campgrounds meant easy meals. Ranger Thompson positioned himself for a clear shot and fired the beanbag gun. The projectile struck the ground near the bear with a loud thud, causing the animal to jolt in surprise. He fired a second round, this one hitting closer, while Ranger Martinez added to the deterrent by triggering an air horn that cut through the morning quiet with an ear-splitting blast. The combined assault on its senses finally convinced the bear to retreat. It lumbered away from Kyle's campsite, occasionally looking back as if weighing whether the potential meal was worth the unpleasantness, before disappearing into the forest beyond the campground's edge. "That's step one, Ranger," Martinez said, lowering the air horn. "But it'll likely be back. Maybe not today, but soon. Bears have excellent memories when it comes to food sources." She turned to Kyle, noticing his bandaged wrist. "You're injured. What happened exactly?" Kyle explained the encounter while Ranger Thompson inspected the campsite, noting the scattered food and the damaged frying pan. Mike enthusiastically offered his video evidence, which the Rangers watched with professional interest. "You actually handled it pretty well, considering," Ranger Martinez commented after viewing the footage. "Standing your ground was the right call with a black bear. Running might have triggered a chase response, but next time try to back away towards safety earlier if possible. And cooking bacon in open campgrounds is just asking for trouble, especially in bear country." Kyle nodded, accepting the gentle reprimand. "Lesson learned. Speaking of which, what's the damage here?" He indicated his wrist, which had begun to throb again as the ice pack warmed. "You should get that looked at properly," the ranger advised. "There's an urgent care clinic in Estes Park, about a 20-minute drive from here. We can take you there now if you'd like, or you can drive yourself if you feel up to it." Kyle considered the offer, looking back at his RV. "I think I can manage. The drive. My right wrist is injured, but I'm left-handed, fortunately. I'd rather keep my vehicle with me if possible." Ranger Martinez nodded. "All right, but we'll escort you to make sure you get there safely. In the meantime, Ranger Thompson will secure your campsite. It's not safe to leave food out, obviously, and we'll need to take an official report about the bear encounter for our records." While Thompson worked to clean up the scattered breakfast and properly store Kyle's cooking equipment, Martinez took Kyle's statement, recording the details of the encounter on an official form. She also provided him with information about compensation for damaged property through the Park Service, though Kyle waved it off. "A bent frying pan is a small price to pay for a good story," he said with a wry smile, though the persistent pain in his wrist undermined his attempt at nonchalance. Once the campsite was secured and the paperwork completed, Kyle retrieved his wallet and keys from the RV and prepared to follow the Rangers to Estes Park. Barbara insisted on giving him a proper dose of ibuprofen from their well-stocked first aid kit before he left, and Mike promised to keep an eye on his campsite during his absence. "I'll post the video while you're gone," Mike said as Kyle climbed into the driver's seat of his Winnebago. "Don't worry, I'll tag you once you give me your social media details. This might go viral. Man fights bear with frying pan. It's the kind of thing people love to share." Kyle managed a pained smile, more concerned with his throbbing wrist than with internet fame. "Whatever you think is best, Mike. Just make sure. The Rangers get a copy too. It might help with their reports." The drive to Estes Park followed a winding road that descended from the higher elevations of Rocky Mountain National Park to the charming tourist town that served as the eastern gateway to the park. Under different circumstances, Kyle would have enjoyed the scenic journey, with its sweeping views of mountain valleys and the occasional glimpse of wildlife along the roadside. Today, however, his focus was divided between safe driving with his injured wrist and processing the morning's events. The Mountain View Urgent Care Clinic was located just off the main street in Estes Park, a modern single-story building that stood in contrast to the rustic, tourist-oriented businesses that dominated the town. Kyle parked his RV in the spacious lot, said goodbye to Ranger Martinez, who had escorted him there, and headed inside. The waiting room was relatively quiet for a weekday morning, with only a few other patients waiting their turn. Kyle approached the reception desk and explained his situation to the young woman seated behind it. "Bear encounter, huh?" she said, looking up from her computer with new interest as she handed him a clipboard with forms to complete. "That's the third one this month. Was it in the park?" Kyle nodded as he awkwardly filled out the paperwork with his left hand. "Moraine Park Campground. Black bear came right up to my campsite while I was cooking breakfast. Let me guess. Bacon. When Kyle confirmed with a slightly embarrassed nod, she smiled knowingly. Classic bear attractant. We see a lot of similar cases every summer. Bears have an incredible sense of smell, you know. They can detect food from over a mile away. After completing the paperwork and waiting about 20 minutes, Kyle was called back to an examination room where a physician assistant named Steve examined his wrist, manipulating it gently while asking about his range of motion and pain level. "Good news," Steve announced after completing his examination. "It's not broken, just a moderately severe sprain. The tendons are inflamed and there's some ligament strain, but I don't see evidence of a tear or fracture. Still, I'd like to get an X-ray to confirm, especially given the mechanism of injury. Hitting a bear is pretty unusual, even for Estes Park." The X-ray confirmed Steve's initial assessment. No fracture, just a sprain, albeit a significant one. Kyle was fitted with a rigid wrist brace to immobilize the joint and given instructions for care: rest, ice, compression, and elevation, along with over-the-counter pain relievers as needed. "You should take it easy for at least 2 weeks, Steve advised as he secured the brace. "Minimize use of this hand, no heavy lifting, and definitely no more bear fighting." He smiled at his own joke. "The ligaments need time to heal. If you're still having significant pain after 2 weeks, you should follow up with your regular doctor for an MRI to rule out any subtle tears we might have missed." Kyle thanked him and asked, "So am I free to continue camping? I had planned to stay in the park for the rest of the week." Steve considered this. "Medically speaking, there's no reason you can't continue your trip as long as you protect that wrist and don't do anything too strenuous. Practically speaking, camping one-handed might be challenging. It's up to you, but just be aware that everyday tasks will be more difficult for a while." Kyle decided he would return to the campground, at least for now. He'd invested too much, planning in this trip to cut it short for a sprain, and the thought of navigating his RV all the way back to his home in Arizona with an injured wrist seemed less appealing than simply adapting to campground life for a few more days. Besides, he was curious to see how the rangers would handle the bear situation and felt a strange sense of investment in the outcome. After paying his bill, thankful that his travel insurance would likely cover most of the expense, Kyle stopped at a pharmacy in town to fill his prescription for stronger pain medication and purchase additional supplies: extra ice packs, a waterproof cover for his brace to use while showering, and some easy-to-prepare meals that wouldn't require much cooking or cleanup. By the time Kyle returned to Moraine Park Campground, it was early afternoon. The incident had consumed most of his day, and the pain medication was making him drowsy. To his surprise, his campsite had attracted something of a crowd in his absence. Several fellow campers were gathered near the Tanner's RV, and they turned to look as Kyle pulled in, expressions of curiosity and concern on their faces. Mike rushed over as Kyle carefully descended from the driver's seat, mindful of his braced wrist. "The man of the hour returns," he exclaimed, clearly enjoying the attention the morning's events had generated. "How's the wrist? Not broken, I hope." "Just a bad sprain," Kyle confirmed, suddenly feeling the fatigue of the day catching up with him. 2 weeks in this brace, then I should be good as new." "Well, you've become something of a local celebrity while you were gone," Mike informed him, leading Kyle toward the gathered campers. "My video's already at 20,000 views and climbing fast. I've had calls from 2 local TV stations wanting to interview you, and even a reporter from a Denver newspaper." Kyle blinked in surprise. "All that in just a few hours? I'm not sure I'm up for interviews, Mike. It was just a bear and a frying pan, not exactly headline news." But as the small crowd of campers approached, offering words of admiration and asking to see his injury, Kyle realized that his modest assessment wasn't universally shared. In a world of carefully curated social media highlights, an authentic moment of wilderness confrontation, captured on video no less, had struck a chord. People were fascinated by his encounter, perhaps seeing in it something primal that resonated with their own camping experiences or fears. A middle-aged woman named Janet, who introduced herself as an avid hiker staying at a nearby campsite, summed it up. "You stood your ground against a wild predator with nothing but kitchenware. That's the kind of story people connect with. Everyday courage, you know. Plus, it's a good reminder that nature isn't just pretty views and perfect photos. There's real wildness out there, and sometimes it walks right into your breakfast." Kyle managed a tired smile, appreciating her perspective, even as he longed for the quiet solitude of his RV. I appreciate that, but honestly, I'm pretty wiped out from the whole experience. I think I need to rest for a bit. The gathered campers seemed to understand, dispersing with final words of support and promises to check on him later. Only Mike lingered, clearly still riding the excitement of his video's viral journey. "I hope you don't mind, but I gave your number to that Denver reporter," he said, at least having the decency to look slightly apologetic. "She seemed really interested in getting your first-hand account. Said it might make the front page of their outdoor section." Kyle suppressed a sigh. "It's fine, Mike. Just maybe hold off on giving out my contact info to anyone else for now. I'm not really looking for attention." Mike agreed, though somewhat reluctantly, before returning to his own campsite where Barbara was entertaining another group of curious campers with her version of the morning's events. Left alone at last, Kyle entered his RV and sank gratefully onto the small sofa that doubled as a guest bed when needed. The familiar confines of Roxanne felt especially welcoming after the chaos of the day. He checked his phone for the first time since the incident and found it flooded with notifications. The video Mike had posted was indeed going viral, shared across multiple platforms and generating thousands of comments. Kyle scrolled through some of them, alternately amused and dismayed by the public's reaction. Some commenters praised his quick thinking and courage, while others criticized him for cooking bacon in bear country or for not retreating sooner. A few self-proclaimed wilderness experts offered lengthy analyses of his technique, and there were the inevitable jokes about frying pans now being essential camping gear. One comment likened him to a modern-day Paul Bunyan, trading an axe for kitchen implements. As Kyle set his phone aside, he noticed the bent handle of his cast-iron frying pan, which Mike had apparently retrieved from the Tanner's RV and placed on Kyle's counter. The pan that had served him faithfully for countless meals now bore the mark of its unprecedented use as a weapon. Kyle picked it up with his good hand, feeling its reassuring weight and examining the slight but noticeable deformation in the handle where it had connected with the bear's shoulder. Rather than being dismayed at the damage to a favorite possession, Kyle felt a curious attachment to the pan in its altered state. It had saved him from potential serious injury or worse, and the bend in its handle would serve as a permanent reminder of the encounter. He decided then that he would never repair or replace it, allowing it to remain as a tangible souvenir of his brush with wilderness. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly as Kyle dozed intermittently on the sofa, the pain medication making him groggy. He was awakened in the early evening by a knock at his RV door. Expecting Mike or perhaps another curious camper, he was surprised to find Ranger Martinez standing outside. "Hope I'm not disturbing you," she said when Kyle invited her in. "I wanted to check how you're doing and give you an update on our bear situation." Kyle gestured for her to take a seat at the small dinette table while he carefully lowered himself onto the sofa opposite her. "Just a sprain," he reported, indicating his braced wrist. "I'll live to cook another day, though maybe not bacon in bear country." Ranger Martinez smiled at that. "Good lesson to learn. About that bear, we've been tracking it since it left your campsite this morning. It's a 4-year-old male that we've had tagged since last year. Unfortunately, this isn't its first negative interaction with campers, though it's the first time it's shown such bold behavior." "What happens now?" Kyle asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The ranger's expression turned somber. "We've set up traps in the area. If we catch it, we'll have to make a difficult decision. The Park Service doesn't take euthanasia lightly, but a bear that charges humans represents a significant public safety risk." Kyle felt a pang of regret, knowing that the bear's fate was largely the result of previous human behaviors that had taught it to associate people with food. "Isn't there some kind of bear rehabilitation program, or could it be relocated to a more remote area?" "Relocation rarely works with food-conditioned bears," Martinez explained gently. "They can travel hundreds of miles to return to known food sources, and wherever we move them, they still carry those learned behaviors that make them dangerous. As for rehabilitation, that's more successful with cubs than with adult bears who have established patterns." Kyle nodded his understanding, though the situation still troubled him. "I feel partly responsible. If I hadn't been cooking bacon—" "You're hardly the first," Martinez assured him, "and while the bacon certainly didn't help, this particular bear has been pushing boundaries all season. Your encounter might actually prevent a future attack on someone less prepared or more vulnerable. The video your friend posted is already serving as an educational tool for us." Sometimes people need to see the reality of wild animal encounters to take our warnings seriously. They discussed the broader issues of wildlife management in national parks for a while longer, with Ranger Martinez sharing stories of other bear encounters and the challenges of balancing public access with conservation goals. Before leaving, she provided Kyle with additional information about bear safety and encouraged him to share his experience with other campers as a learning opportunity. By the way, she added as she prepared to depart, that video has made it all the way to park headquarters. The superintendent called it a textbook example of why we need better visitor education about wildlife safety. So you may have inadvertently become part of our training materials. Kyle managed a tired laugh. Happy to help, though I hope my next contribution to park service education is less painful. After Ranger Martinez left, Kyle realized he was hungry, having missed both breakfast and lunch in the chaos of the day. His planned hiking excursion to Emerald Lake had obviously been postponed, and now cooking seemed like a formidable challenge with his injured wrist. Remembering the easy-to-prepare meals he'd purchased in town, he retrieved a pre-made sandwich and an apple from the refrigerator, requiring minimal preparation. As he ate his simple dinner, Kyle's phone rang with a call from an unknown Denver number. Suspecting it might be the reporter Mike had mentioned, Kyle hesitated before answering. He was tired and not particularly eager to recount the morning's events again, but something about the viral nature of his experience made him feel a certain responsibility to provide an accurate account. "Hello, this is Kyle," he answered, balancing the phone between his ear and shoulder as he continued eating one-handed. "Mr. Simmons? This is Alicia Reed from the Denver Post," came a professional female voice. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I understand you had quite the wildlife encounter in Rocky Mountain National Park today." Kyle confirmed that he had indeed had a close call with a bear and agreed to answer a few questions about the experience. Alicia was thorough but respectful, asking about the details of the encounter, his reaction in the moment, and his thoughts on wildlife safety in national parks. "I've seen the video," she commented at one point. "It's quite dramatic. What was going through your mind when the bear charged?" Kyle considered the question, trying to recapture his thought process during those adrenaline-fueled seconds. "Honestly, not much beyond 'don't get mauled,'" he admitted. "It was mostly instinct. I had this heavy pan in my hand, and when the bear came at me swinging, it just seemed like the natural response. I wasn't trying to hurt the animal, just discourage it." "And your injury? How serious is it?" "Just a sprained wrist. Could have been much worse." "Indeed," Alicia agreed. "Park records show that black bear attacks are rare, but they can be serious when they do occur. You're fortunate it was just a sprain. Tell me, has this experience changed how you feel about camping or wildlife?" It was a thoughtful question, and Kyle took a moment before responding. "Not about camping. I've been an RV enthusiast for years, and one bear encounter won't change that. But it's definitely a reminder about respecting wildlife and their space. We're visitors in their home, not the other way around. I should have been more careful about cooking smelly foods in an open campground. That's on me." The interview continued for about 15 minutes, with Kyle sharing his perspectives on wilderness safety and the importance of proper food storage in bear country. When Alicia asked if he had any final thoughts he'd like to share with readers, Kyle emphasized the need for preparation and education before venturing into national parks. "Know the risks, respect the wild, and always have a plan," he summarized, "and maybe pack a heavy frying pan just in case." He added the last bit with a chuckle, able to find some humor in the situation now that the immediate danger had passed. After ending the call, Kyle stepped outside his RV to enjoy the evening air and found the campground quieter than earlier, most campers having retreated to their sites for dinner and evening relaxation. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Moraine Park and painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Despite the day's drama, or perhaps because of it, Kyle felt a deep appreciation for the wild beauty surrounding him. Mike and Barbara were sitting around their small propane fire pit, and they waved Kyle over when they spotted him. He joined them, accepting a camp chair that Barbara pulled up for him and a cup of herbal tea she'd just brewed. "How's our local hero doing?" Mike asked, still clearly enjoying the vicarious excitement. "I checked the video stats before dinner. Over. 50,000 views now and still climbing. You're officially internet famous, my friend." Kyle shook his head, bemused by the unexpected attention. Fame was never on my bucket list, especially not for fighting off wildlife with cookware, but I just got off the phone with a reporter from the Denver Post, so I guess the story has legs. It's the perfect human interest piece, Barbara observed. Man versus nature, everyday objects used in unexpected ways, a touch of danger, but nobody seriously hurt, plus it's all on video. In today's world, that's media gold. They chatted for a while longer, as darkness fell completely, the conversation eventually shifting from Kyle's bear encounter to other camping stories and experiences. Several other campers stopped by to express their well wishes and share their own wildlife encounters, creating an impromptu community gathering around the tanner's fire pit. As the evening wore on, Kyle found himself growing tired again, the combination of pain medication, physical stress, and emotional fatigue catching up with him. He excused himself and returned to his RV, carefully preparing for bed with his injured wrist, complicating even simple tasks like brushing his teeth and changing clothes. Before turning in, he checked his phone one last time and was startled to see that Mike's video had now exceeded 100,000 views. There were several messages from friends and family who had somehow already connected the viral video to him, expressing concern and amazement in equal measure. Kyle responded to the most urgent ones, assuring everyone that he was fine and promising to call with details when he had more energy. As he settled into the RV's comfortable bed, Kyle reflected on the strange turns his peaceful camping trip had taken. What had begun as a routine morning in one of America's most beautiful national parks had transformed into an unexpected brush with wilderness at its most raw, followed by an equally unexpected brush with viral fame. The pain in his wrist throbbed, dully beneath the brace, a physical reminder of the day's events that would eventually heal, unlike the memory which he suspected would remain vivid for years to come. Kyle fell asleep to the familiar sounds of the campground at night, distant conversations, the occasional laugh, the rustle of wind through pine trees, and dreamed of amber bear eyes and the weight of a cast-iron pan in his hand. Morning arrived with a soft pat of rain against the RV's roof, a gentle percussion that eased Kyle from sleep. His wrist ached, dully as he carefully navigated the confines of the small bathroom, adapting his morning routine to accommodate his injury. Simple tasks like brushing his teeth and shaving became exercises in patience and creative problem-solving, but Kyle had always prided himself on his adaptability, a necessary trait for anyone who chose to live on the road for extended periods. After dressing and taking his morning dose of pain medication, Kyle checked his phone and was immediately overwhelmed by the notifications that had accumulated overnight. Mike's video had continued its viral journey, now approaching 1 million views and being shared across multiple platforms. There were dozens of messages from friends and family, several interview requests from media outlets ranging from local news stations to national outdoor recreation magazines, and even an email from a cooking equipment company inquiring about a potential promotional partnership. Good grief, Kyle muttered to himself, scrolling through the deluge of attention. With a mixture of amusement and dismay, he had never sought the spotlight, preferring the quiet solitude of natural spaces to the noise of social media and public recognition. Yet here he was, unexpectedly thrust into 15 minutes of internet fame for what had essentially been an instinctive reaction to danger. A knock at his RV door interrupted his thoughts. Kyle set his phone aside and opened the door to find Mike standing outside under an umbrella, looking even more excited than the previous day. "Have you seen the numbers?" he asked without preamble, barely noticing the light rain dampening his shoulders. "It's gone completely viral. Over 900,000 views, and it was featured on Good Morning America about 20 minutes ago. They used my footage and everything." Kyle blinked in surprise. "Good Morning America? You're kidding." "Nope, they did a whole segment on bear safety in national parks and used the video as their lead-in. They called you the quick-thinking RV camper who defended himself with a frying pan. They didn't use your name, but still, national television." The situation was quickly moving beyond Kyle's comfort zone. What had felt manageable, if unexpected, yesterday, was rapidly expanding into something he wasn't sure he wanted to be part of. The thought of becoming known nationwide as the frying pan guy held little appeal. "Listen, Mike," Kyle began, carefully, not wanting to sound ungrateful but needing to establish some boundaries. "I appreciate you looking out for the video and keeping me updated, but I think I need to put some limits on this whole situation. I'm not interested in giving a bunch of interviews or becoming some kind of wilderness celebrity. It was just a bear encounter. They happen all the time in national parks. Mike's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, but he nodded in understanding. Sure, I get it. Not everyone wants to be in the spotlight, but you might want to at least talk to that cooking company. Could be some free gear in it for you. He grinned, trying to maintain the light-hearted mood. Kyle managed a small smile in return. I'll think about it. For now, though, I'm more concerned about what's happening with the bear. Have you heard anything from the rangers this morning? Nothing specific, Mike replied. Saw a couple of them driving around earlier, but they didn't stop. Barbara heard from someone at the restrooms that they set up traps overnight on the perimeter of the campground. Guess they're serious about catching it. The thought still troubled Kyle. While he understood the reasoning behind the park service's approach to problem bears, he couldn't help feeling a connection to the animal that had briefly shared his space and altered his vacation plans. There was something profound about coming face to face with a wild predator, a reminder of humanity's tenuous place in the natural order that camping often obscured with its comfortable amenities and structured environments. After Mike left to share the news of the national television coverage with Barbara and other interested campers, Kyle made himself a simple breakfast of instant oatmeal, requiring minimal preparation with his injured hand. The rain continued to fall lightly, putting a damper on any ambitious hiking plans, even if his wrist had been up to the challenge. Instead, Kyle decided to use the quiet morning to catch up on some reading, settling onto his RV's sofa with a well-worn copy of Edward Abbey's Desert Solitaire, a favorite that seemed particularly relevant, given his recent wilderness encounter. He had just become engrossed in Abbey's reflections on the value of untamed spaces when his phone rang again, this time displaying a number he recognized, his ex-wife, Marianne. They had maintained an amicable relationship since their divorce 5 years earlier, occasionally checking in on major holidays or birthdays, but otherwise giving each other the space to build new, separate lives. "Kyle, are you okay?" Marianne asked as soon as he answered, her voice carrying the familiar tone of reliable plumbing and room service to what she called voluntarily living in a glorified tin can. Their diverging interests in travel and leisure had been one of many small factors that eventually led to their mutual decision to separate, though the cast-iron pan had indeed been a recurring point of gentle contention. It finally proved, "It's worth beyond breakfast duty," Kyle replied, allowing himself to fall into the easy rhythm of conversation they still managed to maintain despite their history, though I'm not sure bear defense was mentioned in the care instructions. They chatted for a while longer, with Marianne expressing genuine concern about his injury and offering practical advice about managing daily tasks one-handed. As a physical therapist, she had professional insight into recovery from sprains and strains, and Kyle found himself grateful for her suggestions, despite the circumstances of their contact. "Well, take care of yourself," she said as their conversation wound down, "and maybe consider less dramatic ways to become internet famous next time. Your mother called me in a panic this morning after seeing the video, by the way. You might want to give her a call before she drives out to Colorado to check on you personally." Kyle promised to call his mother immediately, thanked Marianne for her concern, and ended the call with the familiar mix of emotions that their interactions typically evoked. A touch of nostalgia, a hint of what might have been, and the quiet acknowledgement that they had made the right decision for both of their futures. His mother, as predicted, was beside herself with worry when he called. At 78, Dorothy Simmons had embraced technology with surprising enthusiasm, maintaining active social media accounts and regularly sending Kyle links to articles about RV recalls or bear sightings in areas where she knew he was traveling. It was entirely in character for her to have spotted the viral video and recognized her son despite the shaky footage. "Kyle Allen Simmons," she began without preamble when he reached her, using his full name as she had whenever he was in trouble throughout his childhood. "Were you going to tell me that you nearly got mauled by a bear? Or were you hoping I wouldn't see the video that's all over Facebook this morning?" "Hi, Mom," Kyle replied, unable to suppress a smile at her familiar tone. "I was going to call you today anyway. It looks worse in the video than it was. The bear was mostly interested in the bacon. Don't you hi Mom me when you're out there using perfectly good cookware as a weapon against wildlife," she retorted, though he could hear the relief beneath her indignation. "I've told you 100 times to be careful in those campgrounds. Nature isn't a theme park, Kyle." Coming from anyone else, the lecture might have been irritating, but from his mother, who had introduced him to camping in the first place during family trips throughout his childhood, it was both familiar and oddly comforting. They talked for nearly half an hour, with Kyle providing reassurances about his safety and well-being, and Dorothy alternating between expressions of concern and practical questions about his ability to manage with an injured wrist. "Maybe there's a sign you should come home for a visit," she suggested toward the end of their conversation. "I haven't seen you since Christmas, and I could help out while your wrist heals." Kyle had been planning to visit his mother in Phoenix after completing his Colorado trip, so the suggestion wasn't entirely unwelcome. "I'll think about it, Mum. I had planned to stay here for a few more days at least, but you might be right about the practical challenges." After promising to keep her updated on both his recovery and any further wildlife encounters, while assuring her that he would do everything possible to avoid the latter, Kyle ended the call and checked the time. It was approaching midday, and the rain had intensified slightly, drumming steadily on the RV's roof and creating a cozy atmosphere inside that made his decision to remain indoors for the day seem particularly wise. A notification on his phone indicated that the Denver Post article featuring his interview was now online. Kyle tapped the link with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, finding himself featured prominently in the newspaper's outdoor section under the headline, "Pan vs. Predator. Colorado Camper's Kitchenware Saves the Day in Bear Encounter." The article was actually quite well written, Kyle had to admit. Alicia Reed had captured the facts of the encounter accurately, while placing it in the broader context of human-wildlife interactions in national parks. She had included quotes from a Park Service wildlife biologist about bear behavior, and from a camping safety expert about proper food storage techniques. Kyle's own quotes were presented thoughtfully, emphasizing his respect for wildlife and acknowledgement of his role in attracting the bear with his cooking. Accompanying the article was a still image from Mike's video, capturing the moment just after Kyle had swung the frying pan, with the bear turning away in surprise and scattered breakfast foods visible in midair. The caption read, "Kyle Simmons, 50, defends himself with a cast-iron frying pan during a black bear encounter at Moraine Park Campground in Rocky Mountain National Park on Tuesday morning." Seeing his name in print alongside the image gave Kyle a strange feeling, as if the experience was somehow becoming more real through its documentation and public sharing. Until now, the encounter had been primarily personal, intense and memorable certainly, but contained within his own experience and immediate surroundings. The article, like the viral video, was transforming it into something public and shared, a narrative that was partly his, but increasingly belonged to others as well. A light tap at his door pulled Kyle from his thoughts. Opening it, he found Barbara Tanner standing outside under an umbrella, holding a covered plate. "Thought you might appreciate a home-cooked lunch," she said, offering the plate. "Nothing fancy, just a sandwich and some fruit, but I figured making food might be challenging with that wrist." Kyle accepted the plate gratefully, touched by the thoughtful gesture. "That's incredibly kind of you, Barbara. Thank you. Would you like to come in for a minute? It's getting pretty wet out there." She accepted the invitation, stepping inside and closing her umbrella. As Kyle set the plate on his small dinette table, Barbara glanced around the RV with appreciation. "You keep this place so tidy," she commented. "Mike's idea of organization in our RV is making sure nothing falls out when we open the cabinets." Kyle laughed, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Years of practice. When you live in a small space, you either get organized or you go crazy. Coffee? I can manage the Keurig one-handed." As they sat with their coffee cups, Barbara shared the latest campground news, which primarily consisted of reactions to Kyle's bear encounter and updates about the weather forecast. The rain was expected to continue through the afternoon, but clear by evening, with better conditions predicted for the following day. "We're thinking of heading out tomorrow," she mentioned. "Mike has a dentist appointment back home on Friday that he can't reschedule. We've enjoyed meeting you, though. Maybe we'll cross paths again somewhere down the road." "I'd like that," Kyle said sincerely. Despite the unusual circumstances of their acquaintance, he had grown to appreciate the Tanner's company and kindness. "Are you two full-timers or just vacation RVers?" "Part-time for now," Barbara explained. "Mike's still covering some classes at the community college, but we're transitioning to full-time next year when he fully retires. We've been practicing with extended trips to see how we handle the lifestyle. So far, So good, though I'm still working on convincing him we need a bigger rig if we're going to live in it year-round. They chatted about RV models and the pros and cons of different lifestyles, full-time versus part-time, boondocking versus established campgrounds, until Barbara needed to return to her own preparations for their departure the next day. As she was leaving, she hesitated at the door. "By the way, there's been some activity at the edge of the campground this morning. Ranger trucks coming and going. Word around the restrooms is they might have caught the bear." Kyle felt a complicated mixture of emotions at this news. Relief that the animal would no longer pose a threat to campers, but also sadness at the likely fate awaiting it. "Thanks for letting me know. I might walk over there later if the rain lets up, see if I can get an update." After Barbara left, Kyle tried calling Ranger Martinez for information but got her voicemail. He left a brief message asking about the bear's status and then settled in to enjoy the lunch Barbara had prepared, a substantial turkey sandwich with avocado and sprouts, an apple, and 2 homemade oatmeal cookies. The thoughtful meal was a iwi, welcome change from his planned simple fare, and a reminder of the community that often formed naturally among travelers. The afternoon passed quietly as the rain continued, sometimes intensifying into a proper downpour before settling back into a steady patter. Kyle alternated between reading, napping, and fielding occasional messages and calls related to his newfound minor celebrity status. He declined 3 more interview requests and responded politely but firmly to the cooking equipment company, explaining that while he appreciated their interest, he wasn't looking to capitalize on what had essentially been a moment of survival instinct rather than a product endorsement. Around 4 o'clock, Kyle's phone rang with a call from Ranger Martinez. He answered quickly, eager for news about the bear situation. "Mr. Simmons, sorry I missed your call earlier," she began. "I wanted to update you personally since you were directly involved. We successfully trapped the bear early this morning at the eastern edge of the campground." "And?" Kyle prompted when she paused, already suspecting the answer from her serious tone. "After consultation with wildlife management, the decision was made to euthanize it," she confirmed gently. "As I mentioned yesterday, this particular bear had multiple documented instances of food-seeking behavior around humans, and your encounter represented a significant escalation in boldness and potential aggression. The safety risk was simply too high." Despite having anticipated this outcome, Kyle felt a pang of sadness. "I understand the reasoning," he said after a moment. "It's just unfortunate that human carelessness essentially signed its death warrant long before it ever came to my campsite." "That's a compassionate way to look at it," Ranger Martinez acknowledged. "And you're right. Food-conditioned bears are created, not born. We work hard on education, but it only takes a few careless visitors to teach bears that humans equal easy meals. Once that association is formed, it's nearly impossible to reverse." They discussed the broader implications for a few minutes, with Martinez sharing that the Park Service was considering implementing more stringent food storage requirements and possibly expanding their ranger-led educational programs about wildlife safety. Before ending the call, she thanked Kyle for his understanding and reiterated that his experience, while unfortunate, was providing valuable material for their public education efforts. "The video has actually been helpful in that regard," she admitted. "Sometimes people need to see the potential consequences to take warnings seriously. The park superintendent has authorized us to use it in our visitor orientation materials, with your permission, of course." Kyle readily agreed, feeling that some good should come from the encounter if possible. Anything that helps prevent similar situations in the future, and if it saves even one bear from being food-conditioned, it's worth it. After ending the Ayang Chiru call, Kyle sat quietly for a long moment, processing the news. The rain had finally begun to let up, patches of blue sky visible between the clouds outside his RV window. Despite his injury and the unfortunate fate of the bear, he felt a strange sense of closure, knowing that the animal would no longer pose a danger to other campers or suffer the consequences of its learned behaviors. As the afternoon transitioned to evening, the rain stopped completely, and the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light across the damp campground. Kyle decided to step outside for some fresh air, feeling somewhat confined after spending most of the day indoors. The air smelled clean and earthy after the rain, with the scent of wet pine particularly strong. Several fellow campers greeted him as he walked slowly through the campground, some offering sympathetic comments about his injury, while others expressed admiration for his handling of the bear encounter. Kyle responded politely but briefly, not wanting to dwell on an event that was beginning to feel somewhat surreal in its public dimension. Near the campground entrance, he encountered a park service vehicle parked beside a large metal trap loaded onto a trailer. Ranger Thompson was securing equipment in the truck bed, and he nodded in recognition as Kyle approached. "Mr. Simmons, how's the wrist?" "Improving gradually," Kyle replied, glancing at the trap. "Is that?" The ranger followed his gaze and shook his head. "No, that one's empty. We're just moving equipment. The bear was transported to our wildlife facility earlier today." He didn't elaborate further, but his expression confirmed what Martinez had already shared about the animal's fate. Kyle nodded in understanding. "I appreciate you keeping me informed. It's a tough situation all around." "Part of the job," Thompson said with a slight shrug that didn't entirely mask the emotional weight of the day's task. "We don't take these decisions lightly, but public safety has to come first." They spoke for a few more minutes about bear management in the park, with Ranger Thompson sharing that they typically had to euthanize 2 to 3 problem bears each season, despite their best efforts at prevention through education and enforcement of food storage regulations. It was clearly a difficult aspect of the rangers' duties, balancing their conservation mission with public safety requirements. As Kyle walked back to his campsite, he noticed that the Tanners had their RV in preparation mode for departure, outdoor, rugs rolled up, camping chairs stowed, and Mike working on disconnecting their water hookup. He waved but didn't interrupt their work, continuing on to his own site, where he found an unexpected package sitting on his picnic table. The small box bore the logo of the Estes Park Visitor Center and a handwritten note attached to the top. Kyle opened the note first, finding a message from Janet, the hiker he'd met briefly the previous day. "Saw this in town and thought you deserved a souvenir of your adventure. Thanks for the reminder that nature deserves both our appreciation and our respect. Safe travels, Janet." Inside the box was a coffee mug decorated with an image of a black bear and the words, "I survived. Rocky Mountain National Park," in playful typography. Kyle laughed despite himself, appreciating the gesture, even as he marveled at how quickly his experience had transformed from a frightening encounter to an anecdote worthy of souvenir merchandise. That evening, as Kyle prepared a simple dinner inside his RV, carefully avoiding bacon or other strongly aromatic foods that might attract wildlife, he reflected on the unexpected turns his camping trip had taken. What had begun as a routine vacation had become a brush with danger, followed by an unwanted taste of viral fame, and ultimately a sobering reminder of the complex relationship between humans and wild spaces. His wrist ached less than it had the previous day, though the doctor's prediction of a 2-week recovery period still meant significant adjustments to his travel plans. Kyle had decided to stay one more night at Moraine Park before heading to a private campground in Estes Park, where he could have full hookups and easier access to services while his wrist healed. From there, he would likely cut his Colorado trip short and head south toward Arizona, perhaps accepting his mother's invitation to visit while he recovered. After dinner, Kyle stepped outside again to enjoy the clearing evening sky, where stars were beginning to appear in patches between the dissipating clouds. The campground was quieter than usual, many visitors having departed during the day due to the rain or in response to the bear incident. Those who remained seemed to be keeping closer to their campsites, the communal atmosphere of the previous evening notably absent. Mike Tanner approached as Kyle was setting up his folding chair, offering to help with the awkward task. "Heading out in the morning," Mike confirmed as they arranged the chair. "Thought I'd say goodbye and see how you're doing. Fame treating you all right?" Kyle smiled ruefully. "I think my 15 minutes are already winding down, thankfully. Got a nice souvenir mug out of it, though. And a good story," Mike added, settling into a second chair Kyle had indicated he was welcome to use. "That's what it's all about in the end, isn't it? The stories we collect along the way." There was an unexpected wisdom in Mike's observation that resonated with Kyle. For all his enthusiasm about sharing the video and reveling in its viral spread, perhaps Mike understood something fundamental about the human experience that Kyle had sometimes overlooked in his quest for solitary communion with nature. The value of stories, both those we live and those we share, in connecting us to each other and making sense of our experiences. "You're right about that," Kyle acknowledged, Though I might have preferred a slightly less painful souvenir than this, he indicated his braced wrist with a wry smile. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the last light faded from the sky and more stars emerged in the clear mountain air. Eventually, Mike rose to return to his own preparations, but before leaving, he handed Kyle a small piece of paper with an email address and phone number written on it. "In case our paths cross again," he explained, "or if you ever find yourself near Lincoln, Nebraska and need a place to park that rig for a night, Barbara and I have plenty of space on our property, and we make a mean breakfast. No bacon, though, I promise." Kyle accepted the contact information with genuine appreciation, realizing that for all his initial irritation at Mike's enthusiasm for sharing the video, he had come to value the unexpected friendship that had formed in the aftermath of his bear encounter. "I'll take you up on that someday," he promised, "and I've got plenty of space in Arizona too if you two ever head southwest." After Mike left, Kyle remained outside a while longer, enjoying the peaceful evening and reflecting on the past 2 days. The bear was gone, its fate a sobering reminder of the consequences when wild animals lose their natural wariness of humans. His wrist would heal in time, leaving perhaps a lingering weakness or tendency to ache before rain, a physical souvenir of the encounter that would eventually fade into background awareness. What would remain more vividly was the memory of those moments of primal connection, the bear's amber eyes meeting his, the split-second decision to stand his ground, the weight of the frying pan in his hand, and the jarring impact as it connected with wild flesh. There was something profoundly humbling about coming face to face with a predator, a reminder that for all humanity's technological advances and comfortable amenities, we remain biological beings in a world where teeth and claws still command respect. The viral video would fade from public consciousness as quickly as it had captured it, replaced by the next momentary sensation. The newspaper article would be recycled or deleted from digital archives. Even the bent frying pan might eventually be replaced when its cooking surface became too worn for effective use. But the experience itself, the visceral reality of that brief intersection between his life and the bear's, would remain a part of him, informing his relationship with wild spaces and perhaps adding a healthy measure of caution to his future adventures. As the night deepened and temperatures dropped, Kyle finally retreated to the warmth of his RV. Tomorrow would bring practical challenges, packing up camp one-handed, navigating to a new location, adapting his travel plans to accommodate his injury. But tonight, surrounded by the vast darkness of the national park, with its hidden wildlife continuing their ancient patterns of existence, Kyle felt a curious sense of peace about the entire experience. He had encountered one of nature's most powerful predators and emerged with a story to tell, a reminder of both human vulnerability and resilience. The bear had walked away from their encounter, and though its ultimate fate had been decided by human management policies, for that brief moment in the morning sunshine, they had shared an authentic connection across the species barrier, predator and prey, wild and civilized, each responding to ancient instincts encoded in their very being. As Kyle prepared for bed, careful with his injured wrist as he changed clothes and brushed his teeth, he glanced at the bent frying pan sitting on his counter. In the morning, he would carefully pack it away for the journey to his next destination. This simple kitchen implement, now transformed into something more, a talisman of survival, a reminder of respect for wild things, and perhaps, most significantly, an anchor for the story that would always begin. Did I ever tell you about the time I fought off a bear with a frying pan? The night settled deep around Moraine Park Campground, and somewhere in the darkness beyond its boundaries, other bears continued their nightly routines, foraging and hunting as their kind had done for millennia. Life in Rocky Mountain National Park went on, the brief intersection of one human and one bear already fading into the tapestry of countless encounters that comprised the complex relationship between wilderness and those who sought to experience it. Kyle Simmons closed his eyes and slept soundly, his dreams filled with amber eyes and mountain silence, his place in the natural order both humbled and affirmed by the encounter that would become his most enduring camping story. Now let's move on to the story of the next survivor. The mid-morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of the Olympic National Forest, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Holly Evans adjusted her woven basket, carefully stepping over a fallen log covered in bright green moss. At 37, she had the confident stride of someone who knew these woods well, though she'd never venture to call herself an expert. The rich, earthy scent of decomposing leaves and rainfall filled her lungs as she paused to consult the small field guide she kept tucked in the pocket of her olive-green hiking vest. Holly had been running her bakery, Wildflower, in Port Angeles for nearly a decade now. What had started as a small farmer's market stall had grown into a modestly successful storefront downtown, known for its rustic sourdough loaves and seasonal pastries featuring foraged ingredients. The incorporation of local wild elements was what set her baking apart from others in the area. Huckleberry galettes in the summer, blackberry scones in the fall, and when she could find them, pastries featuring wild mushrooms that she foraged herself. Today's expedition was focused on finding chanterelles. The recent rains had created ideal conditions, and Holly had taken a rare Tuesday off, leaving her assistant manager Danielle in charge of the bakery. She needed these golden treasures for an upcoming catering job, a wedding for a Seattle couple who had specifically requested her wild mushroom tartlets after tasting them at a friend's event last year. Holly brushed a strand of her chestnut hair away from her face, tucking it behind her ear, as she crouched to examine a promising cluster of fungi at the base of a Douglas fir. Not chanterelles, just some look-alike species she wouldn't risk. After photographing them with her phone for later identification, she stood and continued along the faint trail. She'd left her car at the Staircase Ranger Station parking lot 3 hours ago, checking in with the ranger on duty, a standard procedure she always followed when foraging alone. "I'll be back by 4 at the latest," she'd told the ranger, a middle-aged man named Rick whom she recognized from previous visits. He'd nodded, noting her planned route on his clipboard and reminding her to be cautious. "Bear activity's been picking up lately," he'd mentioned casually. Nothing aggressive reported, but more sightings than usual. Holly had assured him she'd be careful, patting the canister of bear spray attached to her belt, a precaution she never skipped. She'd encountered black bears twice before while hiking in these woods, and both times the animals had quickly retreated after noticing her presence. Still, she respected the wilderness and the creatures that called it home. As she ventured deeper into the forest, Holly found herself in a particularly promising area, north-facing slope, mixed conifer forest, properly damp but not saturated. She smiled as she spotted the distinctive golden funnels of chanterelles pushing up through the needle litter. Kneeling carefully, she used her small mushroom knife to cut the fungi at their base, gently brushing away dirt before placing them in her basket. For the next hour, Holly worked methodically through the area, finding enough chanterelles to fulfill her catering needs with some extras for the weekend market special. The repetitive motion of foraging, crouching, cutting, cleaning, moving forward, had a meditative quality that she cherished. It was moments like these, alone in the vastness of the forest, that provided a necessary counterbalance to the heat and bustle of her bakery kitchen. The forest had grown quieter, she realized. The ambient chorus of birdsong that had accompanied her morning had diminished to occasional calls. Holly straightened, stretching her back as she glanced at her watch just past noon. She decided to continue for another hour before starting back, giving herself plenty of time to reach her car before her promised return time. Moving north, along the gentle slope, Holly came to a small clearing where a fallen tree had created a natural opening in the canopy. Sunlight streamed down, illuminating a patch of forest floor thick with vegetation. She paused, taking a sip from her water bottle and surveying the area. Something caught her eye, movement near the edge of the clearing. At first, Holly thought it might be a deer, but as she focused, her breath caught in her throat. Not 15 yards away, a small black bear cub was pawing at a rotting log, presumably searching for insects. Its glossy black fur shone in the sunlight, and it moved with the awkward, playful manner of a young animal. Holly's first thought was not of the cub, but of what the cub implied. Where there was a bear cub, a mother bear was never far away. Her heart rate accelerated as she slowly, carefully began to back away. She'd never encountered a cub before, and she knew this presented a far more dangerous situation than her previous bear. Sightings. She'd taken only 3 steps when she heard it, a huffing sound from her right. Holly turned her head slowly, and her worst fear was confirmed. Standing approximately 20 yards away was an adult female black bear, her attention now fixed squarely on Holly. The bear's posture was alert but not yet aggressive, head raised and nostrils flaring as she assessed the human threat to her offspring. Holly knew the protocol for bear encounters. Don't run. Don't make direct eye contact. Back away slowly, make yourself look big if the bear approaches. But knowing what to do and being able to execute it while adrenaline floods your system are two very different things. She felt her hands trembling as she slowly, deliberately backed away from both bears, trying to keep both animals in her peripheral vision without staring directly at either. "Hey bear," she called out in a firm but not aggressive tone. "I'm just passing through, no problem here." The mother bear huffed again, taking a step forward. Holly's heart hammered against her ribs. The bear dropped onto all fours, and in that moment Holly knew the situation had escalated. The mother bear began advancing toward her, not in a full charge but with clear intent. The cub, seeming to sense the tension, scampered behind a fallen log. Holly reached for her bear spray with fingers that felt thick and uncooperative. As she fumbled with the safety cap, the bear increased her pace. In a split-second decision that she would later question repeatedly, Holly abandoned the bear spray attempt and looked for escape. Bear safety protocols recommended standing your ground with black bears, but with a mother defending her cub, Holly's instincts screamed for her to find safety. Her gaze landed on a large Douglas fir with low, sturdy branches. Without further hesitation, Holly dropped her basket of carefully collected chanterelles and sprinted for the tree. Behind her, the sound of the bear's movement changed, the huffing louder, the footfalls heavier and faster. The mother bear was now in pursuit. Holly reached the tree and leapt for the lowest branch, adrenaline giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. She pulled herself up, scrambling higher as quickly as possible. Black bears are excellent climbers, she knew, but she hoped gaining some height would discourage the mother from following, allowing enough time for the bear to collect her cub and move on. She'd climbed about 15 feet up when she heard the scratching of claws on bark. Looking down, her stomach dropped as she saw the mother bear beginning to climb the tree after her. Holly climbed higher, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She reached for the next branch, testing it quickly before pulling herself up. Then, in a moment that would replay in her nightmares for months to come, the branch cracked. There was a sickening sense of sudden weightlessness as Holly lost her grip. She fell, tumbling through smaller branches that whipped against her face and arms. She twisted instinctively, trying to control her fall, but the ground rushed up too. Quickly, Holly hit the forest floor with a brutal impact that knocked the wind from her lungs. Pain exploded through her left ankle and up her leg. She gasped for breath, momentarily stunned by the fall. The pain in her ankle was immediate and intense, a sharp, nauseating sensation that told her something was very wrong. But there was no time to assess the injury. The mother bear had descended the tree and was now approaching her again, huffing and popping her jaws, clear signs of agitation. Holly tried to stand, but collapsed immediately as her left ankle gave way beneath. Her panic surged through her as she realized her vulnerability. Injured on the ground with an agitated mother bear approaching, with no other options, Holly rolled onto her stomach and curled into a protective ball, covering her neck with her hands and remaining as still as possible. This was the recommended position for grizzly encounters, not black bears, but her injury left her with few alternatives. She could hear the bear's breathing, smell its musky odor as it approached. The bear circled her, huffing and occasionally vocalizing in a low growl. Holly kept her eyes tightly shut, focusing on remaining still, despite the pain pulsing through her ankle and the overwhelming urge to flee. She could feel the bear's presence, sensed when it came close enough that its breath warmed the back of her hand. The animal made a woofing sound, then batted at her backpack with a powerful paw, the force rolling Holly slightly to one side. Holly bit back a cry of pain as the movement jarred her injured ankle. The bear retreated a few steps, then approached. Again. This time Holly felt a searing pain as the bear's claws raked across her upper right arm and shoulder, tearing through her jacket and into the flesh beneath. The pain was immediate and intense, a burning sensation followed by the warm wetness of blood. Still, Holly maintained the protective position, fighting against the instinct to struggle or cry out. The bear made another pass, this time delivering a more forceful blow to her left thigh. The claws tore through her hiking pants, leaving deep lacerations. Holly couldn't suppress a whimper of pain. For what seemed like an eternity but was likely only minutes, this terrifying interaction continued, the bear circling, occasionally striking or biting, then retreating. Each contact brought new pain, but Holly maintained her protective posture, understanding that movement or resistance would likely escalate the attack. Then, suddenly, she heard the cub vocalizing from the edge of the clearing. The mother bear's attention shifted. After a final huff directed at Holly, the bear moved away, returning to her cub. Holly remained motionless, afraid to look up or change position until she was certain the bears had left the area. Only when the forest had been silent for several minutes did Holly cautiously raise her head. The clearing was empty. The bears had gone. Relief washed over her, immediately followed by an intense wave of pain from her various injuries. She gingerly shifted position, assessing the damage. Her right arm and shoulder bore deep lacerations, bleeding freely. Similar wounds marked her left thigh. Smaller cuts and abrasions covered her hands and face from the fall through the tree branches. But most concerning was her left ankle, swollen to nearly twice its normal size, with a strange, unnatural angle that suggested a serious fracture. Holly knew she needed help, and quickly. She was approximately 3 miles from the ranger station, with no clear trail. The thought of covering that distance with her injuries seemed impossible, but staying put without alerting anyone to her situation was equally dangerous. Night would fall in a few hours, temperatures would drop, and the risk of infection or more serious complications from blood loss would increase. Wincing against the pain, Holly reached for her backpack, which the bear had torn partially open. Her water bottle had survived intact, as had her phone, a stroke of luck she desperately needed. With trembling fingers, she checked for service. 1 bar, weak but present, enough, she hoped, to call for help. She dialed 911, praying the connection would hold. After several seconds of static, a dispatcher's voice came through. 911, what's your emergency? I've been attacked by a bear in Olympic National Forest, Holly said, her voice shaking with pain and residual fear. I'm injured and can't walk. I need help. The dispatcher's voice remained calm as she asked for details. Holly's location, the nature of her injuries, and whether the bear was still present. Holly provided as much information as she could, describing her approximate location based on her planned route that she'd shared with Ranger Rick. Help is on the way, the dispatcher assured her. Try to stay warm and keep pressure on any bleeding. Wounds, can you stay on the line? I don't know how long my battery will last, Holly replied. And service is spotty. Understood. If we get disconnected, try not to worry. Emergency responders and forest rangers have been alerted and are mobilizing. They know which area to search based on your information. Holly ended the call to conserve battery, then used her emergency first aid kit to address her wounds as best she could. She applied pressure bandages to the deeper lacerations on her arm and thigh, wincing at the pain. For her ankle, there was little she could do beyond keeping it elevated on her backpack. Time passed with excruciating slowness. The forest, which had always been a place of comfort for Holly, now seemed filled with potential threats. Every rustle in the underbrush, every distant sound made her heart race with fear that the bears might return. The pain from her injuries throbbed in persistent waves, occasionally spiking sharply when she shifted position. As the afternoon progressed, the temperature began to drop. Holly pulled her torn jacket tighter around herself, grateful that she'd worn layers, as was her habit when foraging. She checked her phone periodically, battery at 60%, then 45%, the signal fluctuating between 1 weak bar and none at all. Just as the shadows were lengthening significantly, Holly heard the most welcome sound, human voices calling her name, still distant but approaching. She called back as loudly as she could, her voice hoarse with pain and emotion. Within minutes, 2 forest rangers and a wilderness paramedic emerged into the clearing. The relief that flooded through Holly at the sight of them brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Ms. Evans, I'm Ranger Martinez. This is Ranger Collins, and that's Alex Harris, our wilderness paramedic, the female ranger said as they approached. We're going to get you out of here. The wilderness paramedic immediately began assessing Holly's injuries while one of the rangers radioed their position. The paramedic, Alex, was efficient and gentle as he examined the lacerations on her arm and thigh. You're going to need stitches for these, and that ankle definitely looks broken, he told her. But you've done a good job with the first aid. Let's get you stabilized for transport. As Alex worked to properly bandage her wounds and splint her ankle, Ranger Martinez asked Holly about the bear encounter, the size of the bears, their behavior, the exact sequence of events. Holly recounted the experience as clearly as she could, though certain moments blurred together in her memory. A black bear sow with a single cub, Martinez noted on her report form. Defensive attack triggered by proximity to the cub. This matches reports we've had of a female with one cub in this area over the past month. Will you have to do anything about the bear? Holly asked, wincing as Alex tightened the splint. On her ankle. In this case, no, Martinez replied. This was defensive behavior in the bear's natural habitat, not an unprovoked attack or one that occurred at a campsite where bears might have been conditioned to human food. The bear was protecting her cub, which is natural behavior. There was a certain relief in that answer. Despite her traumatic experience, Holly didn't want the bear destroyed for behaving as nature had programmed it to. With her injuries bandaged and her ankle splinted, the next challenge was evacuation. They were miles from the nearest road accessible to vehicles, and Holly's injuries made walking impossible. We've got a wilderness extraction team on the way with a stretcher, Ranger Collins explained. They should be here within 30 minutes. In the meantime, we need to keep you warm and comfortable. They provided Holly with an emergency blanket from their pack, its silver surface reflecting her body heat back to her. Alex administered pain medication that took the sharpest edge off her discomfort, though the throbbing in her ankle persisted. As they waited for the extraction team, Holly's thoughts turned to practical matters. Her bakery, the wedding catering job she'd been gathering mushrooms for, the long recovery that clearly lay ahead. The realization that her normal life had been suddenly and dramatically interrupted began to sink in, bringing with it a wave of anxiety that temporarily overshadowed the physical pain. My business, she said suddenly. I need to call my assistant. Manager, we can help you make any calls once we get you to safety, Ranger Martinez assured her. Right now, let's focus on getting you out of these woods before dark. The extraction team arrived just as the forest was dimming into early evening. Shadows. 4 wilderness first responders carrying a specialized stretcher made their way into the clearing. After a brief consultation with Alex about Holly's condition, they carefully transferred her onto the stretcher, securing straps across her body to prevent movement during the challenging journey out of the forest. The trek back to the ranger station was slow, and despite the team's best efforts, painful for Holly. Every jolt as the stretcher bearers navigated uneven terrain sent spikes of pain through her injured ankle. The forest that had seemed so peaceful and welcoming just hours earlier now felt vast and threatening as shadows deepened between the trees. By the time they reached the ranger station parking lot, night had fallen completely. An ambulance waited with lights flashing, its rear doors open in preparation. Holly was transferred from the wilderness stretcher to the ambulance gurney, then loaded into the vehicle for transport to Olympic Medical Center in Port Angeles. During the 30-minute drive to the hospital, the paramedics in the ambulance established an IV line to provide fluids and additional pain medication. They took Holly's vital signs repeatedly, monitoring for signs of shock or other complications. One paramedic, a woman named Sarah, kept up a gentle conversation, asking Holly questions about her bakery and her life in Port Angeles, partly to assess her mental status, but also, Holly suspected, to keep her mind occupied during the painful journey. At the hospital, the emergency department was waiting for her arrival. Holly was immediately taken for x-rays of her ankle, followed by a thorough cleaning and examination of her lacerations. The emergency physician, Dr. Patel, confirmed what Holly had already suspected. Her left ankle was broken, specifically a bimalleolar fracture that would require surgery to properly repair. You've got 2 fractures in your ankle, both the medial and lateral malleoli, Dr. Patel explained, showing Holly the x-ray images. You'll need surgery to place screws and possibly a plate to stabilize these fractures. Orthopedics will be consulting shortly. The lacerations on her arm, shoulder, and thigh required numerous stitches, 27 in total, after being thoroughly cleaned and examined for any foreign material. Dr. Patel explained that animal bite and claw wounds carried a high risk of infection, and Holly would need to be admitted for at least 24 hours for IV antibiotics and observation. As the medical team worked, a sheriff's deputy arrived to take an official report of the bear attack. The questioning was brief, as he could see Holly's exhaustion, but he needed the basic details for his report. This will be shared with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, he explained. They track all wildlife encounters, especially ones resulting in injury. Once the immediate medical needs had been addressed, Holly was finally able to make some necessary phone calls. She called Danielle, her assistant manager, first. "Oh my God, Holly," Danielle exclaimed when Holly explained what had happened. "Are you okay?" "Well, obviously you're not okay, but you know what I mean." "I'll be fine eventually," Holly assured her, though she didn't entirely believe it herself yet. "But I'm going to need surgery on my ankle tomorrow, and I'll be out of commission for, well, I don't know how long." They discussed the immediate practicalities. Danielle would step up to full management temporarily. They'd need to hire extra help for the busy morning shifts, and the weekend farmers market would have to be skipped this week. The most pressing concern was the wedding catering job scheduled for Saturday. "The mushroom tartlets," Holly said, the irony not lost on her. "I didn't even get to bring the chanterelles back." "Don't worry about that," Danielle insisted. "We can source some from Pike Place Market. I'll drive to Seattle tomorrow if necessary. You just focus on getting better." Next, Holly called her Sister Kate in Seattle, who immediately insisted on driving to Port Angeles first thing in the morning. "I'll be there before your surgery," Kate promised. "And I'm staying to help you get settled at home afterward. This isn't negotiable, Hol." After the calls were made, exhaustion crashed over Holly like a wave. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the attack and rescue had long since dissipated, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that even the persistent pain couldn't override. When a nurse arrived to administer a sedative and additional pain medication, Holly welcomed the approaching oblivion of sleep. Morning brought the orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Reeves, who explained the procedure she would perform to repair Holly's ankle. "We'll place several screws and a small plate to stabilize both fractures," she explained. "The surgery itself will take about 2 hours. Recovery is a longer process. You'll be non-weight-bearing for 6 weeks, followed by physical therapy to regain strength and mobility." Kate arrived as promised, her usual composed demeanor slipping. Momentarily, when she saw the extent of Holly's injuries, she quickly recovered, squeezing Holly's hand and assuring her that everything would be taken care of. Before Holly was taken to surgery, a wildlife biologist from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife stopped by her room. Mark Simmons introduced himself and explained that he was following up on the bear encounter report. "We're not planning any intervention regarding the bear," he assured Holly, echoing what Ranger Martinez had told her. "This was defensive behavior in the bear's natural habitat. However, we'll be posting additional warning signs in that area of the forest, and rangers will be advising hikers to be particularly cautious." He asked Holly to describe the encounter once more, taking detailed notes about the bear's appearance and behavior. Holly recounted the experience as accurately as she could, though certain moments, particularly during the attack itself, remained a blur of sensation and fear rather than clear memories. "You did well to remain still once you were injured," Simmons told her. "With black bears, the conventional wisdom is to fight back during an attack, but in this case, with a mother defending her cub and you being injured, minimizing further provocation was probably the safest choice." He left Holly with his card, asking her to contact him if she remembered any additional details or had questions later. The surgery itself was a blank in Holly's memory. She recalled being wheeled into the operating room, the anesthesiologist, asking her to count backward from 10, and then nothing until she woke in the recovery area, groggy and disoriented. Her left leg was elevated, encased in a temporary cast from foot to knee. The pain was different now, a deep, throbbing ache rather than the sharp, immediate pain of the fresh fracture. Over the next 24 hours, Holly remained in the hospital for observation and continued IV antibiotics. A physical therapist visited to demonstrate how to use crutches without putting any weight on her left foot, a skill that proved more challenging than Holly had anticipated. By late afternoon on the second day after the attack, Holly was cleared for discharge. Kate had already been to Holly's small craftsman house in Port Angeles to prepare for her arrival, moving furniture to create clear pathways for crutches, setting up a temporary bed in the living room to avoid the stairs to Holly's second-floor bedroom, and stocking the refrigerator with easily prepared meals. The drive from the hospital to Holly's house was Holly's first real exposure to the outside world since the attack, and she was surprised by how threatening ordinary things suddenly seemed. The shadows between buildings, the rustling of wind through landscaping shrubs, each triggered a momentary spike of anxiety, a physiological echo of her encounter in the forest. At home, the reality of her situation began to fully sink in. The orthopedist had been clear about the recovery timeline: 6 weeks non-weight bearing, followed by another 4 to 6 weeks of partial weight bearing with a walking boot, then physical therapy to regain full strength and mobility. Holly's bakery required her to be on her feet for long hours, kneading dough, moving between ovens and cooling racks, serving customers. Even with Danielle managing day-to-day operations, Holly's absence would be a significant challenge for the small business. The financial implications were equally concerning. Holly had health insurance, but the deductible and co-pays would still be substantial. Add to that the reduced income from not being able to work at full capacity, and the outlook was worrying. "You'll figure it out," Kate assured her that evening as they sat in Holly's living room, Holly's elevated legs supported by pillows on the coffee table. "You've built that business from nothing. This is just a temporary setback." But in the quiet hours after Kate had gone to sleep in the guest room, Holly found herself replaying the attack in her mind. The cub pawing at the log, the mother bears, huffing breath, the moment of weightlessness as the branch broke beneath her. These images cycled through her thoughts in vivid detail. Each time she began to drift toward sleep, her body would jerk awake, heart racing as if she was still in that clearing, still facing the approaching bear. It wasn't until the pale light of dawn began filtering through her curtains that Holly finally fell into a restless sleep, only to be awakened 2 hours later by the arrival of a flower delivery, a bright arrangement sent by her bakery staff with a card signed by everyone. The next few days established a new, restricted routine. Kate stayed for the first week, helping Holly navigate the challenges of basic tasks, showering with one leg wrapped in a plastic bag and propped outside the tub, preparing meals while balancing on crutches, finding comfortable positions that allowed her wounded arm and thigh to heal while keeping her ankle elevated. Danielle visited daily with updates on the bakery's operations. The wedding catering had gone well despite the last-minute adjustments, though the chanterelles sourced from Pike Place Market hadn't been of the quality Holly would have provided. Regular customers had been asking about Holly, concerned after hearing rumors of her accident. "The Port Angeles Daily News wants to do a story," Danielle mentioned on her third visit. "They caught wind of the bear attack and reached out to me at the bakery." Holly hesitated. The thought of having her experience turned into a local news item made her uncomfortable, but she also recognized that transparency might be better than allowing rumors to circulate. "Tell them they can email me some questions," she finally decided. "But I don't want any photographs of my injuries or anything sensationalistic." The reporter, a young woman named Melissa Chen, was respectful in her questioning, focusing on the facts of the encounter and Holly's safety recommendations for others who might be foraging or hiking in bear country. The resulting article appeared in the local paper 2 days later, a straightforward account with the headline, "Local Baker Survives Bear Encounter in Olympic National Forest." To Holly's surprise, the story was picked up by the Seattle Times, which ran a condensed version in their regional news section. This wider coverage led to an unexpected flood of support. Emails and messages from customers and fellow foragers, cards and small gifts delivered to the bakery, even a few offers of financial assistance from loyal patrons concerned about the future of Wildflower. The attention was overwhelming for Holly, who had always been more comfortable creating in her kitchen than being in the spotlight. But the support did help alleviate some of her financial concerns, particularly when a local restaurant association organized a fundraising event to help cover her medical expenses. Physical recovery progressed slowly but steadily. After 2 weeks, the stitches were removed from Holly's lacerations, leaving angry red lines that the doctor assured her would fade significantly over time. The temporary cast was replaced with a more durable fiberglass one, purple at Holly's whimsical choice. "Might as well have some fun with it," she'd told the orthopedic technician. The psychological recovery proved more challenging than the physical. Holly's sleep remained disrupted by nightmares, vivid recreations of the attack, or variations where the outcome was even worse. During the day, unexpected sounds could trigger a startle response that left her heart racing. The therapist she began seeing, Dr. Winters, explained that these were normal responses to trauma. "You're experiencing some symptoms of post-traumatic stress," Dr. Winters told her during their second session. "This is your brain's way of trying to process what happened and prepare you for similar threats in the future." They worked on grounding techniques to use when anxiety spiked and began the process of carefully revisiting the attack in a controlled, therapeutic setting to help Holly integrate the experience. 3 weeks after the attack, Holly felt ready to return to the bakery, not to work, but simply to be in the familiar space. Kate had returned to Seattle, but Danielle drove Holly to Wildflower on a Tuesday morning, before opening hours to avoid customer interactions that might be overwhelming. Stepping, or rather crutching, through the back door into the kitchen brought an unexpected wave of emotion. The familiar sense of yeast and flour, the gleaming stainless steel work surfaces, the recipe binders stacked neatly on the shelf, all these elements of her daily life before the attack suddenly seemed precious in a way they hadn't before. Danielle had kept everything running remarkably well. The daily production list was written on the whiteboard in her neat handwriting, ingredient orders had been placed appropriately, and the kitchen was impeccably clean. Several of the staff arrived early that day specifically to welcome Holly, their genuine concern touching. "We've been managing," Danielle assured her as they sat in Holly's small office, "but it's not the same without you. The sourdough is temperamental, it misses your touch." Holly laughed at that. "Sourdough has no loyalty, it performs for whoever feeds it regularly." That brief visit helped Holly reconnect with her pre-attack life and strengthened her determination to reclaim it fully. She began stopping by the bakery several times a week, gradually getting more involved in menu planning and special orders, though actual baking was still beyond her physical capabilities. As the 6-week mark approached, Holly's anticipation of having the cast removed was tempered by anxiety about returning to more normal activities. The protected, limited life she'd been living since the attack had become a kind of safety cocoon, and the prospect of greater independence brought both excitement and fear. Dr. Winters helped her process these conflicting emotions. "It's normal to feel anxious about expanding your activities," she explained. "Your sense of safety was profoundly disrupted by the attack. Rebuilding it takes time and happens in stages, not all at once." The day the cast was removed, Holly was surprised by how foreign her own leg looked, the skin pale and slightly shriveled, the muscle noticeably atrophied from weeks of disuse. The orthopedist fitted her with a walking boot and emphasized that she should still use crutches, gradually transitioning to putting partial weight on the injured ankle as tolerated. "Physical therapy is crucial now," Dr. Reeves stressed. "The fractures have healed well, but rebuilding strength and mobility will take consistent work." Holly's physical therapist, Ryan, was both encouraging and demanding, pushing her to work through discomfort while being attentive to signs of actual pain. The exercises were simple but challenging. Ankle rotations, gentle resistance work with elastic bands, balancing exercises. Each session left Holly exhausted, but with a sense of tangible progress. 8 weeks after the attack, Holly attempted her first baking session since the injury. She chose a simple bread recipe, one she could make with her eyes closed, and planned carefully to minimize movement around the kitchen. Even with these preparations, the process was more taxing than she'd anticipated. Standing at the counter, with partial weight on her booted foot, Holly found herself tiring quickly, and the mechanics of kneading dough while maintaining her balance proved awkward. But the moment she pulled the finished loaf from the oven, golden brown and fragrant, something shifted inside her. This small act of creation, this return to her craft, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been lost in the forest clearing that day. Gradually, Holly increased her presence at the bakery, though she continued to rely heavily on Danielle and the staff for physically demanding tasks. Regular customers welcomed her return with genuine warmth, though Holly noticed that many seemed to view her differently now, with a mixture of curiosity and something like respect for having survived such an encounter. The question she heard most frequently was whether she would return to foraging. Holly had been asking herself the same thing with no clear answer. The forest, once a place of solace and discovery for her, now existed in her mind as two overlapping realities: the familiar, nurturing wilderness she had known for years, and the sight of terrifying violence and vulnerability. At her 3-month orthopedic follow-up, Dr. Reeves was pleased with Holly's progress. The X-rays showed good healing, and while Holly still had limitations in range of motion and experienced some pain after prolonged standing, these were improvements that would continue with ongoing physical therapy. "You're healing well," Dr. Reeves told her. "The hardware in your ankle, the screws and plate, is stable and doing its job. We'll leave it in place unless it causes problems down the road." The scars from the bear's claws and teeth were healing too, fading from angry red to silvery pink. The deepest ones would likely remain visible forever. 3 parallel lines across her upper arm and shoulder, a similar set on her thigh, smaller marks on her forearm where she'd raised it defensively. Holly had mixed feelings about these permanent reminders. Sometimes they seemed like unwanted violations of her body. Other times, they felt like evidence of her survival, marks of an experience that had changed her in ways beyond the physical. As spring arrived in the Olympic Peninsula, bringing longer days and the first flush of new growth in the forests, Holly found herself increasingly restless. The seasonal cycle of her business would normally have her planning foraging trips for early spring edibles, fiddlehead ferns, young nettles, wild onions. Instead, she was sourcing these ingredients from farmers and other foragers, maintaining the wild element in her baking through proxy, rather than direct engagement. Dr. Winters suggested that returning to the forest, not necessarily for foraging, but simply being in that environment again, might be an important step in Holly's recovery. Traumatic experiences can create powerful associations between the location of the trauma and the feelings of fear, she explained. Revisiting the general environment in a safe way can help break that association and allow new neutral or positive experiences to develop. Holly considered this advice carefully. The thought of being among the trees again brought a complex mixture of longing and dread. She missed the sensory experience of the forest, the sense of soil and vegetation, the quality of light filtering through the canopy, the feeling of solitude and connection to the natural world. But the fear remained, the knowledge that the wilderness held dangers that could emerge without warning. After several therapy sessions focused on this specific challenge, Holly decided to attempt a short, easy hike on a popular, well-traveled trail in the national forest. She asked Danielle to accompany her, both for practical support given her still healing ankle and for the emotional safety of not being alone. The morning of the hike dawned clear and mild. Holly packed and repacked her small day pack several times, checking and rechecking items, water, snacks, first aid kit, fully charged phone, and a new canister of bear spray that she handled with a reverence born of experience. The Heart of the Hills trail they'd selected was wide, well-maintained, and frequently used by families and casual hikers, about as far from the remote area where Holly had encountered the bear as possible while still being in the national forest. As they pulled into the parking area, Holly felt her anxiety rising, manifesting as a tightness in her chest and a slight tremor in her hands. "We don't have to do this today," Danielle said, noticing Holly's distress. "We can just have a picnic at the overlook near the parking lot and try the trail another time." Holly considered this escape route, tempted to postpone the challenge, but something stubborn within her pushed back against the fear. "No, I want to try," she said, "but we'll take it slow, and if it gets to be too much, we'll turn back. No heroics today." The first few hundred yards of the trail were the hardest. Each rustle in the underbrush, each movement glimpsed from the corner of her eye, sent a jolt of adrenaline through Holly's system. She gripped her hiking pole tightly, scanning the surroundings with an intensity that left little room for enjoying the beauty around her. Danielle chatted casually as they walked, seemingly about nothing important, but Holly recognized the steady stream of conversation for what it was, a constant audible reminder of human presence that would alert any wildlife to their approach. It was one of the recommended bear safety protocols that Holly had always followed herself: make noise while hiking to avoid surprising animals. As they continued along the trail, passing other hikers and exchanging brief greetings, Holly gradually felt some of the tension in her body easing. The familiar sensations of the forest began to register: the slight give of the earth beneath her boots, the cool shade beneath towering conifers, the distinctive sense of cedar and pine. Her breathing slowed, and she found herself able to look around more, to notice the early spring wildflowers emerging along the trail edges. They hiked for just over a mile before finding a suitable spot to rest, a small clearing with a fallen log that made a natural bench. Holly eased herself down, stretching her left leg out to relieve the ache that had built up in her ankle. "How are you doing?" Danielle asked, offering Holly a water bottle. Holly considered the question carefully. The anxiety hadn't disappeared, but it had receded to a manageable background hum rather than an overwhelming roar. She had made it this far without succumbing to panic or needing to retreat. "I'm okay," she said, and was surprised to find it was true. "Not great, but okay." This was a good trail to start with. They remained at the rest spot for nearly half An hour, sharing the trail mix Holly had prepared and watching a pair of chickadees flitting among the branches above them. The ordinariness of the moment, two friends taking a break during a hike, felt both strange and precious to Holly. It was a glimpse of normality, of the possibility that the forest could again be a place of enjoyment rather than just fear. The return journey to the trailhead was easier, partly because the trail was slightly downhill, but mostly because the initial hurdle had been overcome. Holly, still startled at unexpected sounds, still scanned her surroundings with more vigilance than casual hikers might, but the constancy of the fear had diminished. Back at the car, Holly felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride at having faced the challenge, relief that it was over, exhaustion from both the physical exertion and the emotional strain, and a glimmer of something like hope that her relationship with the forest wasn't permanently severed. "Thank you for coming with me," she told Danielle. As they drove back toward Port Angeles, "I couldn't have done this alone." "First step of many," Danielle replied with a smile. "You'll be hunting chanterelles again before you know it." Holly wasn't so sure about that. A short, controlled hike on a popular trail was vastly different from venturing off-trail to forage, especially alone. But it was, as Danielle had said, a first step. Over the following weeks, Holly continued her physical therapy and her sessions with Dr. Winters. She returned to the Heart of the Hills Trail twice more, once with Danielle and once with her sister Kate during a weekend visit. Each time the experience became a little easier, the anxiety a little less dominant. By early summer, Holly had returned to full-time work at the bakery, though she still experienced fatigue and discomfort after long days on her feet. The walking boot had been replaced with a supportive ankle brace, which she wore consistently despite its bulkiness under her clothes. Physical therapy exercises had become part of her daily routine, and she was diligent about completing them even on busy days. The bakery had not only survived her absence, but had developed in unexpected ways. Danielle had introduced several new items to the menu that had proven popular, and the staff had stepped up admirably to maintain quality and service. Holly found herself embracing a slightly different role, still the owner and creative force behind Wildflower, but more willing to delegate and collaborate than she had been before the attack. The one area where Holly continued to struggle was the sourcing of foraged ingredients. She had established relationships with several local foragers who provided her with seasonal wild edibles, but it wasn't the same as collecting them herself. The direct connection to the ingredients, the intimate knowledge of exactly where and how they had grown, these were elements of her baking philosophy that she missed profoundly. In late July, an unexpected opportunity arose. Mark Simmons, the wildlife biologist who had interviewed Holly in the hospital, contacted her about participating in a public education program about bear safety in the national forest. The Ranger Service was developing enhanced materials for visitors following several bear sightings, though no additional attacks that season, and they thought Holly's experience could provide valuable perspective. Holly's initial reaction was reluctance. Revisiting the attack in such a public way seemed daunting, and she wasn't sure what she could offer beyond her own frightening story. But after discussing it with Dr. Winters, she began to see potential value in the opportunity, both for others who might benefit from hearing about her experience and for her own ongoing recovery. The program was scheduled for an evening presentation at the main visitor center in the National Forest. Holly prepared carefully, working with Simmons to ensure that her story would contribute to educational goals rather than simply sensationalizing the encounter. She was determined to emphasize both the rarity of such attacks and the importance of proper preparation and response. The evening of the presentation, Holly felt a familiar anxiety as she drove to the visitor center. Public speaking had never been her favorite activity, and speaking about such a personal and traumatic experience added an additional layer of stress. But there was also a sense of purpose that helped steady her nerves. The presentation room was nearly full, a mix of tourists, local outdoor enthusiasts, and park staff. Holly sat quietly at the side as Simmons gave an overview of black bear behavior and safety protocols. When it was her turn to speak, she moved to the front with a slight limp that persisted despite months of physical therapy. Looking out at the attentive faces, Holly took a deep breath and began to share her story. She described her experience. Honestly, the initial fear upon seeing the cub, the terror of the mother bear's approach, the pain of her injuries, and the long recovery process. But she also emphasized the context. She had been in the bear's territory near its cub, and the attack had been defensive rather than predatory. The bear was being a bear, she told the audience. It was protecting its young in the only way it knew how. I was the visitor in its home, not the other way around. She outlined the lessons she had learned, the importance of making noise while hiking, carrying bear spray and knowing how to use it, being especially cautious during seasons when cubs might be present, and having a clear plan for communication in emergency situations. During the question and answer session that followed, Holly was surprised by the thoughtfulness of the questions and the genuine concern expressed by many attendees. Several people thanked her for her willingness to share such a difficult experience for the benefit of others. One question in particular stayed with Holly after the event. A young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, had asked, "Has your experience changed how you feel about bears or about nature conservation in general?" Holly had considered the question carefully before answering. "It hasn't changed my belief in the importance of protecting these animals and their habitat," she had said. "If anything, it's deepened my respect for wild creatures and the natural world. What it has changed is my understanding of my place within that world. I'm more aware now of being a visitor, of the responsibility that comes with entering wild spaces, and of the inherent unpredictability of nature. That awareness isn't a bad thing, even if the way I gained it was traumatic." Driving home from the presentation, Holly felt a subtle shift within herself, a sense of having transformed something painful into something potentially useful for others. It didn't erase the trauma or complete her recovery, but it did feel like another step in integrating the experience into her life story, rather than having it remain a defining rupture. The following weekend, Holly made a decision. She called Jacob Turner, an experienced local forager who had been supplying wildflower with wild mushrooms and other foraged ingredients since her injury. "I'd like to go out with you sometime," she told him. "Not quite ready to forage on my own, but I miss being in the deeper woods, seeing what's growing." Jacob readily agreed, suggesting a location known for summer berry picking that was accessible without difficult hiking. They arranged to meet early the following Saturday morning. The night before the planned foraging trip, Holly slept poorly, waking several times from dreams of being in the forest. But unlike the nightmares that had plagued her earlier in her recovery, these dreams were more ambiguous, tinged with anxiety but also with anticipation and familiar sensory details of the woodland environment she had loved. Morning brought clear skies and mild temperatures, ideal conditions for their expedition. Holly packed her gear with the same careful attention she had given it before her first post-attack hike, with one addition, a small notebook in which Dr. Winters had suggested she record her observations and feelings during the experience. Jacob met her at the arranged location, a small parking area near a trailhead less frequented than the main tourist routes. He was a tall, bearded man in his 50s who had been foraging the Olympic Peninsula for decades. Holly had known him casually through farmers' markets for years, but had developed a closer professional relationship since he began supplying her bakery regularly. "We'll take it at whatever pace works for you," he assured her as they prepared to set out. "No pressure, no expectations. If you want to turn back at any point, just say the word." The trail they followed was narrow but clear, winding through mixed forest toward an area where blackberries and huckleberries grew in abundance. Jacob maintained a steady flow of conversation as they walked, pointing out interesting plants and fungi, sharing stories of previous foraging trips, asking Holly occasional questions about how she might use certain ingredients in her baking. Unlike the highly trafficked trail of her first post-attack hike, this path took them deeper into the forest, away from the sounds of roads and other hikers. Holly felt her anxiety rising as the signs of human presence diminished, but she used the grounding techniques Dr. Winters had taught her, focusing on her breath, naming things she could see around her, reminding herself of the differences between this situation and the one in which she had been attacked. Jacob, she noted, made regular noise as they hiked, not just through conversation, but by occasionally calling out "Hey bear" in a loud, clear voice, particularly when approaching blind curves or dense vegetation. He also, she observed, carried bear spray in an easily accessible holster on his belt. These precautions were reassuring, evidence of respect for the potential dangers without undue fear. After about 40 minutes of hiking, they reached the berry patch Jacob had described, a sloping clearing where blackberry canes grew in tangled abundance along the forest edge. Beyond them, The more delicate huckleberry bushes dotted the partially shaded transition zone between clearing and forest. "Best berries I've found this season," Jacob said, gesturing toward the patch. "Sweet as honey and plenty ripe." They set to work gathering berries, starting with the blackberries. The familiar rhythm of the task, reaching, picking, placing the fruit carefully in containers, had a calming effect on Holly. She found herself gradually relaxing into the activity, becoming absorbed in selecting the ripest berries and avoiding the sharp thorns of the canes. When they moved to the huckleberries, working their way along the forest edge, Holly became aware of how closely she was scanning the surrounding woods, how her attention would snap to any movement or sound from that direction. The vigilance wasn't debilitating as it might have been months earlier, but it was constant, an underlying current beneath the pleasant activity of foraging. They had been picking for perhaps an hour when a sound from deeper in the forest, a cracking branch followed by rustling vegetation, caused Holly to freeze. Her heart rate immediately accelerated, and she felt the familiar flood of adrenaline through her system. Jacob had heard it too. He straightened, turning toward the sound with alert but not panicked attention. "Hey, Bear," he called loudly. "We're just over here picking berries." Holly found herself taking small steps backward, away from the forest edge and toward the more open clearing. Her hand moved instinctively toward the bear spray on her belt. There was a moment of tense silence, then more rustling. From the underbrush emerged not a bear, but a large barred owl, launching itself from a low branch and gliding silently across the clearing before disappearing into the trees on the far side. The relief that flooded through Holly brought with it a slightly hysterical urge to laugh. She exhaled sharply, her tense posture relaxing somewhat. "That got the heart rate up," Jacob commented with a small smile. "Always good to be alert out here, but that fellow's not a threat unless you're a mouse." Holly nodded, noticing that her hands were trembling slightly as she resumed picking berries. She took a moment to record the incident in her notebook, the trigger, her physical and emotional response, and the resolution. Dr. Winters had encouraged this practice as a way of tracking patterns in her reactions and recognizing progress over time. They continued foraging for another hour, gathering enough berries to fill their containers. By the time they started back toward the trailhead, Holly felt a complex mixture of emotions: residual anxiety from the owl incident, satisfaction from the successful gathering, fatigue from the sustained alertness she had maintained, and a tentative reconnection with the activity that had once brought her such pleasure. Back at the parking area, Jacob helped Holly transfer her share of the berries to her own containers. "How was it for you?" he asked. His tone suggesting he understood the question went beyond the simple mechanics of berry picking. "Harder than I expected in some ways," Holly answered honestly. "Easier in others. I'm glad I came." "Anytime you want to join me, just call," Jacob offered. "Always. Good to have company out there, and you've got a better eye for the choice specimens than most." That evening, Holly sorted through her gathered berries, setting aside the most perfect ones to incorporate into pastries for the bakery's weekend special. The familiar task of working with foraged ingredients, inspecting, cleaning, planning their use, felt like reclaiming a piece of her pre-attack identity. When she called Dr. Winters to report on the experience, the therapist was encouraging. "Every exposure that ends positively helps to create new associations," she explained. "It won't ever erase what happened, but it can exist alongside it, providing balance and perspective." Over the next few weeks, Holly ventured out with Jacob, twice more, once to gather wild hazelnuts and again to check an early chanterelle spot he knew of. Each trip brought its moments of anxiety, particularly when moving through denser forest or encountering unexpected sounds, but the overwhelming fear that had characterized her first post-attack ventures into the woods gradually diminished. By late summer, Holly had established a new relationship with the forest, not the carefree, comfortable one she had known before, but not one dominated by trauma either. It was a relationship characterized by heightened awareness, by a more profound respect for the wild nature of these spaces, and by careful preparation for each venture. She continued to source most of her foraged ingredients through relationships with other foragers, finding value in the community this created, but the occasional foraging trips she undertook herself had a special significance, representing both personal victory over fear and reconnection with an activity that had long been central to her identity and her craft. The physical reminders of the attack remained. Holly's ankle still ached after long days on her feet or when the weather changed. The scars on her arm, shoulder and thigh had faded to silvery lines, but were clearly visible, permanent markers of her encounter. She still experienced occasional nightmares and moments of hypervigilance triggered by unexpected sounds or movements, but these aspects of her experience had become integrated into her life rather than defining it. The bear attack was now part of her story, a significant part, but not the conclusion. It had changed her, as all profound experiences do, but it had not diminished her. On a clear September morning, nearly a year after the attack, Holly stood at the workbench in her bakery kitchen, carefully arranging thin slices of chanterelle mushrooms on circles of puff pastry. These particular chanterelles had special significance. They were the first she had gathered entirely on her own since the attack, from a reliable spot just off a well-traveled trail in the national forest. The solo foraging trip had been a milestone she had worked toward gradually, with the support of Dr. Winters, Jacob, and her own determination. The anxiety had been present, as it likely always would be in such situations, but it had been manageable, a companion rather than an obstacle. As Holly placed the finished tartlets into the oven, she glanced out the window toward the distant outline of the Olympic Mountains, their peaks clear against the blue autumn sky. The forest that covered those slopes remained a complex place in her mind, a source of both beauty and danger, comfort and fear, nourishment and threat, but it was a complexity she had come to accept, even embrace. The bear that had attacked her had likely continued its life in those woods, perhaps now teaching a growing cub to forage for itself, to survive in its challenging environment, to navigate the complex territory it shared with humans and other creatures. Holly hoped it remained wild and free, keeping a reasonable distance from human activities, but persisting in its natural home. Her own path forward had its challenges. The bakery needed continued attention to maintain its success. Her ankle would likely never be quite as strong as it had been before the fracture. The psychological impacts of trauma had changed her perspective on risk and safety in ways both limiting and enlightening. But as the rich aroma of baking pastry filled the kitchen, Holly felt a deep sense of contentment with the life she had reclaimed and reshaped. She had found her way back to the forest, back to the craft she loved, back to herself, not unchanged but whole. The Seattle Times article about her attack had long since been forgotten by most who had read it, becoming just another brief story of human-wildlife encounter in the constant flow of news. But for Holly, the experience remained vivid and meaningful, a reminder of both human vulnerability in wild places and human resilience in the face of trauma. That afternoon, when she placed the chanterelle tartlets in the bakery's display case, arranging them carefully alongside sourdough loaves and berry scones, a regular customer commented on how delicious they looked. "Are those your foraged chanterelles?" the woman asked. "They have the most amazing color." "Yes," Holly replied with a small, satisfied smile. "I found them myself just a few days ago." It was a simple statement, but one that carried the weight of an entire year's journey, from injury to healing, from fear to gradual reclamation, from trauma to integration. The forest had taken something from her on that October day, but it had also given her something in return, a deeper understanding of herself, of resilience, and of the complex relationship between humans and the wild world we briefly enter and inevitably leave again.